Hello, my name is Nick Hughes. I am Director of Business Development for a hyper-local startup in Seattle. We're working on local search and local commerce. The company's called Knotis. So we're here to talk about, we've heard a lot today about a lot of the stuff that's going on in the local market, but how about the challenges? It's not an easy market. And so we're going to talk with a few panelists about what is inherent to local and why is it actually difficult and how do we overcome that. So before we get started, I would like to go down the line. I'll have each one introduce themselves and talk about their business real quick, and then we'll get to the topic.
Hello, my name's Manish Patel, and I'm CEO, founder of Where to Get It. We're the only overnight success that you're seeing here today. We've started 18 years ago, and we still exist.
Hi, I'm Anne Bezancon. I am the founder and president of Placecast. I'm glad to be qualified as a grown-up company. I think the three of us are laughing at that statement that Laura made. Placecast is a leading enterprise data management software for mobile. We aggregate location data, user behavior, create segments, and then we can use this for marketing and advertising for our DSP.
Hi, I'm Fred Thiel, the chairman and CEO of Local Corporation. I guess we focus on the local space, hence our name. We have really three aspects to our business. One is an owned and operated business where we have about 240 million unique consumers a year who come through our system looking for where to buy, where is it, what are the opening hours, et cetera. Business listings primarily, but also product data. We also have a large network of publishers that we work with, and then we have a white-labeled mobile search solution we provide to carriers on a global basis.
All right. So really the first thing I want to touch on is, what are the challenges of the local market and why is it more difficult than operating just a simple, web-based business that really has no geography orientation? Like what is the challenge and why is it more difficult?
Well, I think the challenge, first of all, we make it hard on ourselves. All the people in this room, we have to think about all the different players or the actors in this drama. First of all, let's just talk about brands. Where to Get It has focused on enterprise brands for the last 18 years. And what we've seen is that they consistently work in silos. Social media, mobile, you've got design, content, so whatever. And consumers don't think that way. So that's one problem. Second problem is verticals, as an example, Google or Facebook or Yelp. And they've designed their solutions to cater to the SMB, but from an enterprise perspective, you've got that kind of bridge that you've got to cross. When you think about solution providers like ourselves, we make it complicated to sell to the end, either the consumer, the SMB, or the enterprise customer because we want to show how smart we are. And we make that complicated, and we are all chasing what I call the difference between the hype cycle and the sales cycle. The hype cycle, as an example, in 2010, Foursquare was really big, check-ins really hit the scene. And around 2012, we started getting people talking about, hey, what's my Foursquare strategy inside corporate America? And that's just a quick example of how it took almost 18 months to 2 years for something like that to kind of filter through corporate America. So really, our job should be to come in and educate those consumers. And then the last issue really is differentiation. There's over 2,500 marketing technology firms, and we all sound the same, we all look the same, we all have the same similar sounding names, and there's no differentiation. So it's a game of telephone when you're trying to sell something. At the end of the day, when the decision it happens in the boardroom, it's an Excel spreadsheet. This company does this, check. This company does that, check. They all look the same. And ultimately, it's a race to the bottom. And we're just competing on price or whatever that may be. So I think it's difficult because we make it difficult. If we were walking in solving problems rather than trying to sell our wares, then you can actually see the difference in value, and then therefore you're selling on your value, you're creating value, you're helping the customer, and moving forward.
And do you have some thoughts to add on?
Well, first off, I don't know that it's always a drama. I think sometimes it's a comedy. So.
Very true.
Kind of like The Office.
Kind of like The Office or Silicon Valley. So certainly I agree with all the points that have been made. I think there's a couple of others that I would like to hit on. The first one is, local is this very vast domain, and the reality is, as human beings, we just move about and we consume things, and we are not just consumers that move about and that have a mobile phone, right? There's a bunch of other realities that influence what we buy and who we buy it from. And I think that, oftentimes we make a lot of assumptions in our business conversations and our business statements, and we use words and we assume that the other guy or the other gal thinks the same thing. So the first thing I would like to do is bring some definition, because, when we talk about SMBs, the panel before us was actually couching this perfectly, right? There is, picking up a child from school, by contrast to, a plumber or a lawyer or a store that actually sells stuff on a regular basis, maybe daily basis. Those are vastly different business problems, right? And the technology that we can build to support this kind of business problems being solved is going to be vastly different too. So the devil is in the detail, and I think in local it's particularly true. So back to the problem solving versus the opportunity, which is also something that the guy at the end of the panel earlier was saying, is I totally subscribe to this theory that because we're technologists, we tend to like our technology and sometimes not think of what is the problem we're trying to solve. I think that the testament of all our companies being still alive is that we've learned very quickly that you don't actually make a successful business out of wanting to push the stuff that you think is cool, but you're actually adding value and helping someone out there. So the obvious consideration here is, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And tied to the first consideration is, because it's a very specific problem for a very specific defined market, by definition, it has to be a focused enterprise and a focused business, which means how do I gain scale in a focused business with a focused solution becomes the key issue. And I think this is a nice segue for Fred.
Fred.
Well, thank you. Now the pressure's really on. So I think if you look at the evolution we've gone through, local started originally by providing marketing services to small and medium-sized businesses. We got out of that business 2 years ago. We got rid of our sales force. We don't sell to small and medium-sized businesses anymore. Yet we still expose consumers to 16 million plus small businesses and retailers in the US on a daily basis. And so if you look at what we do, our customer today is the consumer. They don't pay us, but the consumer is the person we're serving, as opposed to the retailer. So our focus is, how do we connect consumers to businesses and products and provide them with the information that allows them to make a better selection, a wiser choice, and do that from a perspective of what's closest to them, what's available in stock, who has what, and in their research process and discovery process, provide them with the right information. And I think that what we've seen is consumers have changed the whole way they discover, do research, and purchase today. There are more tools available than ever before. It used to be a desktop computer that they did their research on. There were yellow pages, and there were newspaper ads and coupons. Now you have desktop computers, tablet computers, mobile phones. Soon your car will tell you where local merchants and retailers are, and daily deals will be fed to you through minority port-like electronic signage in the stores that's targeted at you, and through your Apple Watch or whatever watch you have. And so there's a plethora of tools and outlets for information. And the model really becomes, how do you provide the consumer with the most relevant information at the right time based on where they are in their purchase cycle? And how do you offer to marketers, meaning whether they're major national brands, whether they're local retailers, whether they're artists selling their one-off wares, with the ability to put their messages in front of consumers in the best possible way. And it's a very complex ecosystem where I don't think there is the one solution that fits all. I think there are going to be thousands of solutions, and it's going to be kind of a best of breed. If you're a boutique designing high-end jewelry, there's a set of companies and technologies you should use to expose your goods. If you're a national brand and you want to have you know, a major consumer brand that's a packaged goods brand in front of everybody, there's a different set of solutions and technologies to use. So,
I want to touch on the fact that what's changed in the last 10 years is really the mobile device. It's our point of contact for pretty much everything in our life every day. Yet, that's what, you know, local merchants struggle the most with, or, you know, kind of what I think one of the themes I just heard was because there's so many different devices now and there's so many channels to interact with these merchants, how do they figure out, or how are they, you know, what's the best way for them to optimize for that when there's like thousands of different options? There's, you know, in terms of a local merchant, they have, you know, 20, 30 people coming in on a monthly basis selling them something, and they just don't even know what to do. They don't know what decision to make. So how do we overcome that?
Well, I think you've heard today it goes just well beyond just having a website, right? So I think there was a point today you heard that you don't need one. And potentially, if you're covered on Yelp and you're covered on Google and you're covered on social media and so forth, that could be one answer. Obviously, having a landing page or a website is another one. But those types of scenarios rely on making a decision. You know, the solution provider you select really should be the one guiding you through that process. And I think that's really where, you know, sometimes we're just shoving solutions down. And again, as Fred said, you really have to be, you know, the one thing the merchant must do is be savvy enough to understand that this is going to be good for my business. The solutions provider must do is provide solutions that are in line with the technology shifts that are happening. And so from a perspective of us walking into an SMB, or in my case, when we walk into an enterprise brand, the thing that we always talk about is know more about the customer than you know about than they know about themselves. And so that means walking in with, here's what your profile looks like online in your digital footprint, whether it's on, you know, your reputation, or it could be your presence, or it could be your data, and walking in and saying to that client, this is what I know about you right now, and this is an example of how you look versus how your competitors may look. And when you do that, you're educating them along the way. And I think that is one way of bridging that gap. Obviously, data, in many of our clients' cases, they're unaware that 60 to 80% of their traffic's coming on mobile devices, which I find, you know, unbelievable that they wouldn't know that information. But it's one of those statistics when we put it up on our quarterly reviews with our clients. It's like, can you just stop here and let's talk about this? So it's almost like there's that disconnect. So education seems to be one of the ways to solve that.
And do you have something to add to that?
No, I was picking up also on the literacy, and I think again, we're trying to talk about the challenges that people who are embarked in local businesses, which is, again, a very broad definition. I actually don't think that Placecast is in that bucket. So I'm speaking from outside. But we see the same business problems everywhere, which is you cannot sell a solution to someone who doesn't understand what their problem is. To your point, if I don't know that 60% of my audience is actually in relation to my brand on a device that I don't know anything about, I don't know how it works, I don't know how to interact with it, then, you know, you have to simplify. So I think it's the pendant of education is simplification, and simplification on the explanation that you provide, but it's also simplification on how you sell to them, right? Pricing, the conversation earlier. How do you have to boil it down, so that it's a 5-second decision. And I think this is also what distinguishes in the sales process SMBs from any other type of organization that's either regional or national or multinational, even more so, where you have specialized people whose job it is to buy media for direct response. It's very clear what they know, right?
All right, Fred, kind of going on here. What are we looking at currently and on the near horizon advancements in technology that will affect the local market?
Well, the connected vehicle, I think, is going to be the single largest seismic shift in captive audiences that exists, in the world. You have every single automobile OEM and their brother coming out with connected vehicles, whether it's Google Auto, CarPlay for Apple, or whichever solution you're choosing. Cars, as they get more automated, will provide an opportunity for marketers to market to consumers while their butt's in a seat and they're stuck looking at a heads-up display on the windscreen. And oh, by the way, augmented reality, the Starbucks coupon appears as you're driving and there's a Starbucks store right there. So if you think about your VR goggles, wait till you start driving the car of the future.
Can't wait for that future.
So that's kind of a little bit more out there. But the challenge is for retailers, whether they're national brands or whether they're SMB, is there will be a solutions provider who will be the marketing channel that will expose any retailer, any advertiser to people in front of whatever device they choose. And I think what we're going to see is a shift where there are going to be companies that basically own channels, which will be, I'm the king of the automobile heads-up display channel. Just like Google has AdWords, well, there are going to be those similar types of tools that, whether it's long tail or not, will enable any marketer to put their message in front of any consumer at the right time. And it's going to be companies that likely don't exist today that are successful there. But a simple shift that just occurred was the iPhone 6 Plus. How many people here use the 6 Plus? Okay. How many people still have the smaller iPhone or smaller phone? Okay. Those of you who have the iPhone 6 Plus, do you use your tablet less than you used to? Okay. What I've found in the studies we've done is the iPhone 6 Plus has brought the desktop experience to the mobile person. And this is much more prevalent in Asia, where they don't use desktops anymore. And they're not using tablets. The large format cell phone is their only internet device. And because it's a richer experience, you've now gone from this simple mobile experience having to become much richer, more towards a desktop experience. And this shifting landscape back and forth that consumers are causing technologically for marketers to adapt to is very complex.
But that will change. I don't know if this is working or not, but that will change. I think, again, it's going to go back to a smaller screen on the wrist or on the eye or in the ear. So
different type of experience.
Right.
Yeah, and just to add to what Fred was saying, I think that I slightly disagree with what you said about there will be one or a handful of companies. I think that the massive shift that we're seeing, in part because of this, is the shift from the channel to the user. And that is the biggest revolution, I believe, which is we must not care which distribution channel physically we're going to be using. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we have a coherent view of you as a consumer, and that view of the consumer is all about data, and that is separate from media, and that's separate from distribution. And I think that the war that's at play right now, and I have to mention this because it's relevant to this conversation, the acquisition of AOL by Verizon is a tectonic shift in advertising. And most people have not realized how important this is, because the carriers are realizing that in a universe that is going to be chiefly this, they have first-party data that nobody else has, and they have a lot of it.
Yep.
And when you have a concentration of actors that actually have that data, that can actually stand up to Google and Facebook credibly, that completely changes the game about the partition between, when you think of Facebook and Google, they have both the data and the technology, right? Now we're entering a world where we're going to decouple that. And I think it's really important because it has far-reaching implications.
Yep. Just on your point, so we have a solution called Inquiry, which is a white-labeled mobile search that we sell to the carriers so they can disintermediate those other search solutions. And it lets them control the search experience, choose exactly what the consumer is going to see, how they're going to see it, what advertisers can advertise on it, who can't. And we are finding a huge amount of uptake for that solution because the carriers want to control that experience, exactly to your point. And they want to control that channel, just like the automobile OEMs are going to control who can advertise on the heads-up display, not unlike the traditional television or print media and radio has existed in the past. All these channels will be controlled by media owners.
Yeah, and I want to jump into, you know, the last part of this conversation is around data, and I think, you know, I guess a common theme here is the mobile device and how it really has affected the local market especially, but now we have just a flood of data, and how is that going to not only, I think we can touch on positive, but also negatively affecting a lot of the companies that are in here?
Well, I mean, I think just to kind of tag onto that last point, you know, what we call is situational marketing, and that means based on the location, based on the media, the channel, the persona of the consumer, you can actually change a lot of the messaging, especially it becomes complex when you have thousands of locations. So the problem with, in that instance, is you really need to have the data tell you a story. And you know, we really need to have people that can translate the data into a story about what's happening depending on you know, any given location. And the other part of to push that concept forward, I think the other thing is that we sometimes develop customer amnesia. And what happens there is you might have a consumer on Twitter, but then you're using it incorrectly because now they've complained about something on Twitter, but then when they're on Facebook, on email, or on some other media, on their call center, you forgot about who that customer is. So that's a bad use of data, I guess. I mean, you're collecting all this information, and now you're creating amnesia about that customer. They are not thinking that there's 7 different people inside of a call center and, you know, email marketing center, social media center, and whatnot. They're just expecting they're relating or dealing with you from a brand perspective. So the bad use of it is like you're collecting it all, but then now you're not treating the customer in the manner that they expected to be treated. Versus a good use of it would be to kind of make sure that you have that information, and then, you know, from by channel you're actually interacting with them.
Do you think it's an invasion of privacy to mesh that all together and give that to the brand and have them, you know, I mean, because like part of inherent using all these platforms and services is, you know, as a consumer, I have a little bit of faith that some of my data, or at least some of my usage, will maybe stay in an application. So, you know, is it an invasion of privacy, or is it just innovation?
I think it's innovation. I think we have gone beyond. I mean, if you ask, I mean, one question I ask the millennials these days is, would you share your Spotify playlist? And depending on their response time, typically it's like yes. I mean, there's not even a thought. Versus if you asked probably all 3 of us, I might have a hesitation, maybe about even a quarter of a second. I might think about it. That hesitation is an example of the difference between what I think about privacy and what someone else might think about it. And I think the fact that you've heard earlier this morning about consumers are more likely to buy given that they've like liked your product or followed it, or, you know, they've given you some information. They're expecting something, and they're expecting to be treated across all these channels the same or uniform way. So I don't think it's an issue, particularly given the way that these things are structured. Now, however, you know, when you talk about blasting a Starbucks ad when I pass a Starbucks, that's creepy, and that is not something that I would want to participate in. So it's the use case.
I know Anne's got something to say about this.
I'm chomping at the bit here. Well, the first thing is there is gradation, right? Having my health data is vastly different than having my location data to serve me an ad. I don't think I care that much about the latter. I care a lot about the former. So when we talk about privacy, again, having definition and organizing data points in different buckets that correspond to things that are much more sensitive. You know, so health is one easy example, but it's true of religion, it's true of political opinion, it's true of, and you know, I'm French, it's really...
Really?
Yeah, I know you can't hear it, right? The the vast cultural difference in the perception of what's private in France and in Europe versus here, and how that translates in legislation. For anybody here that's doing business outside of the US, it's completely different ballgame. So the point here is in the context of business and in the context of an exchange of value, I think data that I am willing to contribute is something that can be, ascribed value and therefore traded. And I think we're moving away from a consent, authority relationship to a trading relationship. I'm on the other side of the table. I have data that you want in order to make the service free for me, Mr. Google and Mr. Facebook. And I've contended 10 years ago, why can't I buy Google or Facebook for $5 a month, which is about the money that they make, or 10, that's about the money they make off of me, right? I should have the choice to buy instead of being the product. So
I'll take a slightly different bend to this conversation. The sense of the persona, I think the buying persona, is dying very quickly because it's all becoming about consumer intent. The consumer is telling the marketer exactly what they want to buy when they search for it. And consumer intent data, first-party commercial consumer intent data, is much more valuable for targeting consumers than persona. Persona is back to, I'm going to buy a Wall Street Journal ad because the persona of the Wall Street Journal reader is a demographic psychographic. And I'm willing to pay, as an example, $10 per subscriber to get in front of, because my conversion rate might be 1%, versus I'm going to pay $100 per person who has first-party intent regarding they're looking for my product, regardless of income category, regardless of all this other stuff, because my conversion is going to be 40% instead. And I think marketers have gotten very savvy to that. In the world of programmatic, is allowing people to buy audience based on intention versus audience based on persona or circulation or publication. And I see that today, for example, in the data we get from consumers. It's all first-party commercial search intent. They raise their hand, I'm searching for a plumber here, whatever it might be. When you leverage that data programmatically, our advertisers want to retarget those consumers, regardless of what property they happen to be on, with a message based on the intention they showed on our site. That's much more valuable to the marketer than, why would I put a car ad on a pet shop website? Well, because Joe just searched for a car, I know he's now on this pet shop site. If I show him something that would help him prod him along in the purchase process, that's more valuable to me, and I can likely buy that impression at lower cost than targeting that user generically based on a persona. That's, I think, going to be a huge shift in how people act today.
Yeah, I think as we're talking about challenges, we have just a few minutes left here. I really think the biggest challenge over the next decade in this industry is data, is privacy, and how the consent and the privacy and the protection of the privacy is balanced. And just closing thoughts on, how do we go forward with that in mind?
I think in terms of, like we talked about, there's an exchange of value, and to the extent that the information that you're requesting is, and they're receiving value, you're going to see more and more of that line being blurred. I think the user, at this point, everywhere I go, as an example, they're geofencing me, and my app will show you're near a particular store or whatever. I mean, and so, I mean, the concept that we have that we're private should really be thought about is if you don't want anyone to know what you're doing, then don't do it, right? If if you're doing something that you think ultimately somebody's going to find out, then just stop that activity. The rest of it, I think we have to get beyond the fact that no one knows where you are or what you're doing or what you bought or whatnot. So, I mean, my view is really it's the other side of it, is I think we've kind of crossed that chasm already, and the information is widely available, and we need to get over that.
Anne?
Yeah, I think the question is, why do I care, right? And this is
You as a consumer,
as a
or
consumer,
you as
yeah, and it's going to sort itself out. We are just, in the grand scheme of things, we've been dealing with mobile and therefore location for, I started Placecast 10 years ago, so that's 10 years, roughly. And we're still figuring it out. It's gonna take a while, and there will be, cases that are going to end up at the Supreme Court. There is going to be all sorts of, the bubbling and the emulsification that occurs. And then at some point, we're going to land somewhere. And it's really hard to say today where we're going to land, because the legal framework is actually not established.
And I think, given that you're saying we're right at the beginning, I think it's very imperative of the steps forward right now will really determine the path that's taken, right? So it's not that it's like, it's early and we'll figure it out. It's actually really important, the next few steps.
But one thing that you guys may not also know is in Europe, and increasingly in the rest of the world that's copying Europe, the rules are already shaping in a way that is immensely more constraining to business than it is here. And I actually personally think it's a good thing. But looking at the European directives on the topic, the US is more and more different from anybody else, and not necessarily in a good way. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Fred, I'll give you a last word here.
Yeah, and I would just pile on to what Ann just said. Not only is Europe different, Asia's a whole different ballgame. Asia's the wild, wild west. And we see that in talking to mobile carriers in Indonesia. It's like, oh no, I'm going to leverage all this data to the max. I don't care what people say. I'm going to take every single search query this person does, and I'm going to push marketing based on those search queries to them, which in Europe is, and in the States will likely be made illegal here soon, or not illegal, but regulated here soon. So I think it's going to be different markets at different stages of development are going to have very different rule sets, and marketers are just going to have to be very savvy about that.
Yeah. All right. Well, Peter, Ann, Manish, thank you very much. Great conversation, and thank you for listening.